Hi, good morning, or buenos dias, and good afternoon to everyone, and welcome. It's great to have you all join us today for this Regional Studies Association webinar as part of the Regions, Cities, and Industries series. The RSA is a global network that brings together people from different fields to focus on urban and regional research, development, and policy. My name is Laura Sariego-Kluge. I'm a lecturer and researcher at the Universidad de Costa Rica, specifically affiliated with the School of Public Administration and Center for Research and Training in Public Administration, and the Institute for Research in Economic Sciences. It's my pleasure to be here at our book lunch, which will be recorded and made available on the RSA website and app. Today, we're presenting and discussing our recent edited volume, Territorial Development in Latin America, Cultural, Economic, and Environmental Dimensions, published by the Regional Studies Association and Routledge as part of the RSA Regions and Cities book series. We're really pleased to have the opportunity to share it through this international platform and discuss some key insights from our research. This session is especially meaningful because our book brings together a variety of perspectives from across Latin America, reflecting how communities, researchers, and local actors think about and implement development. As many of you know, Latin America is a region characterized by profound diversity, culturally, environmentally, socially, and economically. But it is also a place where development has often meant different things to different people, sometimes imposed externally, sometimes resisted locally, often resulting in new and creative approaches. With this webinar and the book we present today, our goal is to open a conversation on how territorial development can be understood differently, not as a uniform or purely economic process, but as something rooted deeply in local realities, historical contexts, and social struggles. In today's session, we'll hear directly from several authors who contributed to this volume. They'll share brief insights from their chapters, highlighting what is understood by territorial development, critical challenges and solutions they encountered in the research. Allow me to introduce our panelists. First, Diana Morales is a postdoctoral researcher at the Center for Innovation, Technology, and Culture at the University of Oslo. Diana is one of my co-editors and author in the book, and she'll speak in a bit more detail about the inspiration behind the book and the core themes. Tiago Teixeira, senior lecturer at the Newcastle Business School, Northumbria University in the UK, who is also a co-editor, will help us wrap up today's discussion. We also have some of the authors who wrote about their research join us today. Ana Julia Cabrera Pacheco, who's joining us through a video, is a postdoctoral research associate at the University of Edinburgh, the UK. Her chapter explored biocultural territories through her work with Mayan communities on the Yucatan Peninsula. Martín Nicolas Sotiru is a doctoral fellow, and Mariano Féliz is a researcher, both from the Center for Geographic Research at CONICET UNLP, Argentina. They explored territorial challenges linked to agribusiness and resistance movements. Sebastián Saborío is a researcher and professor at the School of Sociology, Universidad de Costa Rica, who examined the territorial impacts of drug trafficking dynamics in marginalized urban areas. Finally, Malena Castilla is an assistant researcher at the National Scientific and Technical Research Council, CONICET, and adjunct professor at the National University of La Matanza, Argentina. Her chapter analyzes the complexities and multiple interests around territorial development projects in the Argentine Chaco. Each one of these contributions highlights different ways in which territory and development intersect and shape one another in Latin America, emphasizing the value of local knowledge, cultural identities, and environmental considerations. We're really looking forward to the conversation today, and especially to reading your questions and comments through the Q&A box later. Now I'll pass it on to Diana Morales, who will provide a deeper look into the ideas and motivations that guided this book and introduce a discussion around the key themes.
Thank you, Laura, and hello, everyone. Good morning, afternoon, or wherever you're joining us. Yeah, we're very pleased to be here. We're pleased to be presenting this book, to which I have to say I feel very proud of. I'm going to tell you a little bit before we go into the authors, and before they tell us a little bit more about the chapters, I want to tell you a little bit about what inspired the book, and what are the key themes or the key critique as well that is behind it. So what this book does is it tries to gather Latin American theory and practice together, highlighting, as Lara was saying, the richness of the geographical literature, as well as the richness of cases, approximations, and solutions that people in Latin America have found to resist and shape their own development agenda. Latin America is a region where development has, more often than not, an experiment, an imposition, and a series of unfulfilled promises. Yet it's also a region of extraordinary richness in terms of culture, in ecological terms, and intellectually. So we wanted to highlight the depth of geographical thinking and the grounded ways in which people across Latin America have resisted and reshaped their own development. It might be worth clarifying that this is the first version of this book was published in Spanish in 2022 by CICAP from the Universidad Costa Rica. And in this first version, we aim to gather key theoretical and methodological contributions from Latin American researchers, some of them joining us here today, and to show again how we could understand development differently. And we were very proud of this book coming out, but the co-authors and the co-editors, we kind of felt like a growing frustration because much of the dominant literature that we could still see in our fields, especially like what is regional studies and economic geography, continues to be dominated by English speaking, and it continued to be very inward-looking and overlooking all the other richness of knowledge that can be produced outside Europe and outside North America. These frameworks, and this is important, and to diversify the conversation is important because these frameworks and this dominant literature often become the basis for policies that do not fit the realities of all places. Despite Spanish being a widely spoken language spoken by over 600 million people, it still remains quite marginal in some academic spaces, at least in our fields, as I was saying. So that's why we propose to the RSA to publish a translated and edited, updated version of the book, to which very thankfully they agreed to, and that's the book we are presenting today. This book then is divided in two parts. One first part of the book takes a little bit more of a historical, contextual, and theoretical approximation. It also has a methodological reflection of what it means to do development, what has been the understanding and the evolution of the terms in Latin America compared to Anglo-Saxon literature, and a reflection of participatory action research as one of the important methodological tools that can be used to deliver development. Alex, can we pass the slide, please? Thank you. So what are the key themes that we're trying to address in this book? At the heart of the book, we pose a critique. We say, as long as development theory continues to prioritize economic growth above all else, the promises of well-being for both people and ecosystems will remain unfulfilled. So this book has two main goals throughout. One is to expose the contradictions and conflicts that are created by one-size-fits-all models of growth and modernization. And second, to showcase alternative ways of thinking and doing development rooted in local contexts, histories, and struggles. We also were wondering, why does development still matter today when the literature and when policy frameworks are moving towards themes of transition, sustainability? Why do we insist talking about development? Well, we believe that development continues to be very important and very closely tied to the challenges that we have today, challenges of inequality, challenges of environmental crisis, the rise of fascism. So it still remains relevant as long as it's understood in a different way. So we're not proposing to continue thinking a traditional way about development, but of rethinking development as a space where we can reimagine futures, where justice, sustainability, and dignity are not only abstract ideals, but live realities and that are shaped by diverse voices. I would like to see more voices from the Global South also emerging here. There are two key themes in the book: territory and territorial development. I'm not going to say much about it because the next presentations will tell us more what they mean, but in general, We understand territory across the book as a central theme in Latin American geography that refers not to the geographical space or as a container of human activity, but as a lived space where people interact, resist, and build futures. Whereas territorial development, we see it as a form of development and a form of progress that centers the territory, that living space, to ensure that people and nature can coexist and thrive. It is context dependent, it embraces diversity, and is concerned for human societies and the natural world. We hope that this book helps us to contribute to a broader shift, one that values diverse worldviews, prioritizes social and economical well-being, and challenges the dominance of capital-centric models. And that will be perhaps plenty of me. I'm going to invite now the presentations of the case study authors.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for this opportunity to present our chapter. The name of the chapter is Dependency, Food Production, and Territorialization at the Borders of Capital in Argentina. With Mariano, we define territory as a segment of geographical space that is appropriated or controlled by social actors who create and sustain it through the exercise of power. These social actors come into territorial disputes because the existence, persistence, and continuity of one territory depend on the displacement of the disappearance of the another. So the process of deterritorialization and reterritorialization result in modification of territorial borders. And in the other hand, we adopt a broad conception of development as a process aimed to transforming existing power relations. And we explain, based on the ideas of Madhuri, that the concept of development involves an epistemic dispute between different interpretations. One perspective emphasizes economic priorities, maintaining capitalism, and viewing the market as the ideal environment for resolving social relations. The other perspective prioritizes politics by critiquing capitalism, exploitation, and modernity, rejecting linear progress and recognizing that societies are shaped by unequal power relations. So, according to this dual interpretation, territorial development has two distinct meanings. On one hand, it involves integrating territories into global capital circuits, recreating or creating dependency. On the other hand, it involves building alternative projects centered on the reproduction of life and nature. The nature of territorial development will depend on the social actors driving this process. Summary, it is important for us to recognize that territorial disputes often reveal at least these two opposing models of territorial development. For us, the case of the advance of agribusiness in Latin America is illustrative of one of these interpretations of territorial development, which integrate territories into global capital circuits. And in response to this advance of agribusiness, counter-hegemonic territorial development models have emerged based on alternative modes of production that challenge the actual corporate food regime. These models aim to change its territories to prioritize the reproduction of life and nature over capital accumulation. Particularly, agroecology facilitates the re-territorialization of family farmers, peasants, and indigenous communities, challenge the dominant agribusiness logic. This reterritorialization involves installing alternative logics and fostering supportive social relations for current and future generations, while promoting fair trade and respect for nature. For these peasants, the territory becomes a shelter for production and reproduction, in contrast to agribusiness, where the territory is merely a platform for profits. In our chapter, we present a recent experience in Argentina to talk about these ideas. So we invite all of you to read it, and thank you for the time.
Thanks, Martin. We're gonna follow with Sebastián.
Good morning, everyone. Today I present my key findings from a chapter which examines how drug dealing groups attempt to territorialize marginalized neighborhoods in Rincon Grande de Pavas, Costa Rica. Contrary to popular narratives that portrays criminal organizations as all-powerful entities dominating entire communities, my research reveals a more nuanced reality. Through interviews with residents, law enforcement, and even former gang members, as well as participatory mapping exercises, I found that drug gangs in Rincon Grande engage in limited and fragmented territorialization. Their control is unstable, contested, and narrowly focused on facilitating drug sales, not governing daily life. This has critical implications for how we understand urban violence and design policies to address it. My research in Rincon Grande de Pavas reveals three critical patterns on how drug gangs establish territorial control. First, I observed that the territorialization process remained narrowly focused on facilitating drug sales rather than comprehensive neighborhood control. The evidence shows no single group achieves monopoly, with multiple gangs operating simultaneously in overlapping areas. Residents describe a landscape of fragmented authority, where gang boundaries remain unclear and contested. Second, I identified that what I term the law of silence, behavioral norms requiring community members to ignore drug activities. Importantly, this control mechanism stays strictly transactional, never expanding into broader governance roles or community management beyond protecting the drug trade itself. Third, my mapping demonstrates how public policy space become dual-purpose zones, serving both community needs and drug distribution. Police operations create temporary displacement, but without addressing the underlying socioeconomic factors. New groups quickly reestablish operations in this strategic location. These patterns reveal fundamentally policy challenges. My research shows current approach often misjudge the limited nature of gang control, leading to suppression strategies that merely displace rather than resolve territorial conflicts. I also find that standard interventions frequently overlook existing community coping mechanisms. Most significantly, my work reveals how institutional gaps enable these limited but persistent forms of territorial control to coexist with weak state presence. My analysis points to two fundamental policy insights. First, we must recognize that policies need to be tailored to address the specific realities of gangs, control, and territorial dynamics to be effective in this context. A standardized approach consistently fail because they don't account for the partial and stable nature of territorialization I've documented. Second, and crucially, my research suggests that before implementing any intervention, we must first understand whether how criminal groups actually control territory in a given location. In summary, my research characterized gang territorialization here as partial, unstable, and economically focused. The evidence argues for multidimensional policy response that address spatial, social, and institutional factors simultaneously, moving beyond simple suppression models. Thank you.
Thank you, Sebastián. I think we finally got Anna's video working. We're gonna give it another try.
Hello, everyone. My name is Ana Cabrera Pacheco. In my chapter, Building Biocultural Territories in the Solares of the Peninsula of Yucatan in Mexico, I address the possibilities of an alternative development based on the everyday lives of Maya people in their own biocultural territories. The dichotomy between the modern and the traditional has been a powerful tool to marginalize and suppress indigenous peoples and place them on the outskirts of society. In Latin America, the rhetoric of modernity based on progress, development, and growth has been present since colonial times and continues to this day under neoliberal capitalist policies. This has resulted in the massive dispossession of ancestral territories and the exploitation of their inhabitants, confined in practices of control, segregation, and exclusion by colonial and nationalist states. A decolonial vision within this chapter incorporates and reinforces the epistemologies and ontologies of indigenous peoples, accumulated through inhabiting their lands and territories for hundreds and thousands of years. A decolonial thought promotes an ecology of knowledges, such as buen vivir, as an alternative to conventional development, or rather, as a series of alternatives to development. Buen vivir raises the possibility of a human subsistence based on ancestral knowledge and respect for nature, and questions a development that is based on economic growth, as it creates environmental damage, individualism, and the commodification of life. Buen vivir is based on the right to self-determination of indigenous peoples, developing their ways of life and oriented towards collective well-being. Buen vivir, or malo custal in Yucatec Mayan, means to profoundly change ideas about development, since progress, nature, and social relations are understood from a different rationality. Thus, from a critical recognition of places as integral geographic sites for the development of indigenous peoples, I have conceptualized Maya Solares as important for the ongoing and lasting processes of resistance to an imposed development. The Maya Solar is the basic habitational unit of the peninsula of Yucatan. It is part of a complex system of land, livelihoods, and identities maintained over time by Maya people through historical and contemporary processes of transformation, adaptation, and resistance. It is a space where Maya autonomy and sovereignty are manifested, largely based on everyday practices and self-subsistence. In this chapter, I contributed to the conceptualization of biocultural territories from a vision of Malo Custal, or Buen Vivir, where the relationships between nature, culture, and ways of life serve as a basis for reflecting on the formation of the territory in the peninsula. Mateo, one of the participants in my research, explained it as, and I quote here, "The most important things for us Maya people is to take care of our territory, because this territory is already ours. The territories are the forests, the water, the oxygen. Everything for me, the microorganisms, the people, it's our territory. It's our identity as Mayas. There's an abundance of wealth that we don't realize. For me, that's the territory." And I end quote. Currently, many Maya people have ways of life closely related to the territory they inhabit, using and transforming their ecosystems. This generates material, practical, and cultural ties in a biocultural relation. From a decolonial perspective, it is the compatibility and complementarity of the Maya Solar with the biocultural territory that allows for the continuous reproduction of both. Beyond reproductive livelihoods, communities also reproduce many elements that maintain the worldview and territories of Maya people, interweaving nature, language, and culture, maintaining continuity in their everyday lives. Threats to the territory are also threats to Maya people, and the discontinuation of knowledge, language, and the everyday life of the Solar. The well-being and quality of life of Solar inhabitants are linked to their environment, so the relationality, complementarity, and correspondence between Solar and territory guarantee the Ma'alob Custal of Maya communities and their biocultural territories as an embodied alternative to conventional development. It is in the reproduction of practices, knowledges, and elements, such as traditional cultivation techniques, the use of medicinal plants, the repetition of rituals, and the continuity of traditional food preparation, that this alternative to development is evident in the Solares. It is from these everyday practices the biocultural territories are shaped and constructed. Thank you.
And it seems that we don't have Malena, so we're gonna continue with Tiago.
Thank you very much. It has been a really a great experience working in this project, and I would like to thank you, everyone. In my short talk here, I would like to briefly share 3 key takeaways from the book. Book which brings together empirical and conceptual contributions to the study of territory and development in Latin America. The first takeaway is related to the emergence and relevance of territorial studies in Latin America. And I would say that this book reflects this major shift in how development studies in Latin America geography happened in the past. So over the past decades, territory and territorial development have become central themes in geography. And I would say this is due to 2 underlying factors. And the first factor is this growing dissatisfaction with dominant development theories for their top-down state-centric focus and disregard for lived spaces and local agency. Here we can mention theories such as modernization theory, neoclassical economics, and at some level, even dependency theory. The second factor underlying the emergence and relevance of territorial studies in Latin America, I would say, is related to the failures of neoliberal reforms that started in the 1990s in Latin America, which resulted not only in contradictions at the local scale, but also in resistance and bottom-up alternative modes of development. These 2 underlying factors led to the emergence of a robust stream of research in Latin America, focused on 2 concepts or related concepts around territory and territorial development, which take us to the second takeaway from our book, which I would say it's this ontological and epistemological shift that territorial studies propose. This book, I would say, illustrates the broader emergence of a robust stream of research in Latin America that is often under a decolonial approach, which one can claim has redefined the concept of territory and development. As we've discussed briefly today here, territory is conceptualized beyond this state power, administrative boundaries in this Weberian sense, but seen as lived space marked by multiple actors and interests, dynamics of power relations and struggles at different scales. Conflicts here, as well as resistance, are central. And territorial development, therefore, entails much more than macro political and economic analysis. It broadens the scope to examine development locally, not in terms of impact, but also in terms of agency, as experiences, values, knowledge, discourses, power dynamics, and resistance are considered and seen as important in driving alternative sustainable modes of development. The third takeaway from this book, I would say, is how the chapters within this book are reflective of broader mainstream literature, which can actually be grouped into 3 key research streams. The first research stream is termed here territories as practice. And studies within the streams, they basically explore the diverse views and interpretations of territory from traditional indigenous communities. Focus here is how global and national forces, for example, such as neoliberalism, they challenge traditional worldviews and result in conflicts and resistance. In this particular book, we can see, for example, chapter 5 and chapter 6 and 7, looking at this contradictory impact of neoliberal policies on territories in Argentina, in Brazil, in many other places. Chapter 6 examines how neoliberal policies has influenced yerba mate cultivation in Vale do Iguaçu in Brazil, challenging small farmers' traditional knowledge and practices. The second stream of literature is what has been termed normative visions of territory. And studies here are interested in looking at, they are based on practice-oriented approaches, often examining alternative modes of development and proposing ways to empower local communities and break with social injustice. If we can see, for example, chapter 7, looking at infrastructure in Chaco, Argentina, urging for the need of alternative modes of development that are more sensitive to local needs, to local knowledge, to their interests. And then finally, the third stream of literature that we can see perpassing the chapters in this book is territory as an analytical concept. And under this topic, scholars have proposed concepts of territory and analytical frameworks to examine territories and development. A well-known framework in the literature is the ones based on the notions of territoriality, territorialization, deterritorialization, and reterritorialization. In this book, we can see one chapter related to this stream of literature, which is chapter 4. For instance, this chapter offers this decolonial critique of hegemonic development and proposes participatory alternatives focused on solidarity and grassroots agency. In terms of contribution, then, you can see that the book brings forth the need for scholars to pay greater attention to the particularities of territories, including their knowledge and histories and culture and struggles, especially when it comes to development. What has been conceptualized as the multidimensional, multi-scale nature of territories, as well as the existing power relations that they are marked by. Another contribution of the book, I would say, is that it highlights the agency of territories. And debates here, they not only acknowledge the relevance of marginalized communities, in other words, their worldviews, values, identities, struggles, and resistance, but also chapters here, they advocate for the incorporation of local voices, their knowledge and solidarity and practices in the construction of territorial development. Books here, the chapters here, they also demonstrate potential for action research, and such studies often involve ethnographic work and high levels of engagement with local communities that are often under severe contradictions, and this opens the possibility for participatory, practice-oriented research approaches that combines investigation with action, and this was clearly the case of chapter 4. So overall, this book invites us to rethink development from the bottom up, not as something done to communities, but something reimagined with them in context, and I would also say in resistance. In terms of call for actions, as editors, we see this book not as a conclusion, but as a starting point. And I would also say that this book is not just about understanding territory or territorial development. It's also about acting within it. So we invite scholars, students, practitioners to deepen their engagement with local contexts, to collaborate with communities, and to push for territorial development practices that are not only inclusive, but also transformative. And that's the kind of geography we hope to see grow from this work. Yes, and thank you very much. And that's all. Bye.
Thank you very much, Tiago. We're going to open the session now for questions and answers. I'm going to start with question that we see in the question and answers box. This is from Luis Amaral to Sebastián. Sebastián, not sure if this is especially relevant to the landscape of Costa Rica, but do local and international criminal gangs differ in the territorialization practices? We can't hear you.
Yeah, I didn't answer the question. Can you repeat it, please?
Yes, I think you can see it in the questions and answers box, but let me paste it,
Okay.
send it in the...
Not sure it's especially relevant to the landscape of Costa Rica, but do local and international criminal gangs differ in the territorialization practices? Yeah, for sure. It is like this for not only for the Costa Rican case, but also for other gangs in Latin America, as local gangs are actually in some degree interested to manage to control the territory in which they're located. As international gangs, they're more interested in controlling the routes of the drugs transportation, as to say, and to control the production, the lengths of the production of the drugs materials. Can we say cocaine or marijuana, for example? So in a way, the territorialization is different, as local criminal gangs that are mainly dedicated to sell their product in the local space are more interested in actually manage to have a positive relations with local residents, as international gangs are not that interested in this aspect. Okay.
Thank you, Sebastián. I'll open the floor to anyone else who would like to ask a question. I think, Tiago, you have a question?
Yes, thank you, Laura. For Mariano and Martin, I would like to ask you a question regarding your chapter in terms of you engage with dependence theory, but also with territorial work, and there's those, it seems, those two strong influences. And I would like to hear more about how you've combined these theories and in order to come up with this analytical framework that you proposed.
Well, thank you, Tiago. In the chapter, we take two examples of the two visions of the interpretation of territorial development we took. We thought that one of the interpretations recreate or more dependency strong. You know that because dependency it's about relations of power. So in that we connect that ideas. We talk about the food regime. So it has the relation is the social actors recreate the dependency, transforming the territory. And in the other hand, the resistance encounter the dependency. The resistance construct autonomy. That's the case of agroecology. It's got the relations with global actors and recreate autonomy of the communities. Sorry for my English, but I hope I explained the question.
Very good, thank you.
Thank you, Martin. We have another question in the chat, and this question might be for us as editors. It's from Helen Belgisario. She says she would like to congratulate us on our work. And she says that she's a researcher at the University of Coimbra, and she is from Brazil. And she would like to know if the book explored how the local network of actors is built and how these actors work together to promote local development and build resilience in the face of challenges. We have quite a few of our chapters that discuss this topic precisely. I am thinking the Mayan one, specifically with small communities. I think you will find very interesting to read these texts, and some of the other chapters also touch upon this issue. I don't know if Diana or Tiago would like to share some insights about this.
I think I can add something. I didn't specify it, but in the book there's a chapter also that talks about this specific region in Colombia where I am from, and that touches upon exactly that. How do local actors come together to create these networks and shape their agendas? So thanks for the question. And I think, yeah, in the book you will find it. What I was trying to argue in this particular chapter is often we see these cases of like very small scale or more like resistant focused when it comes to creating these networks of actors to resist and impose development agenda. However, in this case that I brought to the book, is more a group of local actors that use institutionalized ways of creating networks to build agendas that are better fit for the purposes of the region. And what it makes it very interesting, I think, is that these local networks were created based in what a territory is, in the terms we described it before, as a lived space, or like shared culture, shared ecosystems, shared economic activities, and not necessarily within the borders that the national governments have already created for these spaces. So it's called the coffee region. Some people might be familiar with it. And using this framework of the coffee region as this region that exists in people's minds and culturally, but not necessarily as an administrative place, they have come with several different forms of organization that became institutionalized, and then it served to position ecological concerns and cultural concerns in the top of the local and regional development agenda for these different places. So yeah, maybe that you'll find also interesting.
Definitely. Thank you so much, Diana. We have time for a couple more questions, maybe. I know that Tiago wanted to ask another question as well as Diana. So how about we begin with Diana? Diana, you had a question for Sebastián?
I had a question for Martina and Mariano as well, if I'm allowed. I just wanted to know, since you wrote the chapter, I just wanted to know whether you have seen any more progress in agroecology processes happening in Argentina, or if it has stagnated a little bit due to the current political situation. So it was just a curiosity I had. And I would like to ask Sebastián to expand a little bit on how territories are also shaped by these illegal activities, because the idea that a territory is shaped, but also we keep saying by culture, by nature, by economic activities, but you can also show us it's also shaped by illegal activities. So I was wondering if you could expand a little bit of how that happens.
Diana, thank for your question. Now agroecology is still growing, but lower or not fast because the state retire all the politics that emphasize agroecology. So still resistance, but it's difficult to communities to improve without the help of the state. So we are in a complicated situation, but that's one of the key of agroecology, that it grows autonomy, but it's relevant the help of the state with political that I support, but now it's a complicated situation to science too, but the agroecology resists, and we hope we can fight for new politics to support agroecology in future.
Can I complete Martin's presentation? Yes, as we state in the article, the process of territorialization is a power struggle. So, and in this power struggle, the state at different scales it's always appearing. It may appear as a national state with particular policies and with budgets, etc. But it also appears, for example, with the universities and researchers cooperating with territorialized actors, in this case, and agroecology. So the fiscal crisis and the reduction of budgets in all of the levels of the state is affecting the possibility of these processes of agroecology development to continue. But I think this is an important issue. It's always a process, and it's always a struggle. So we have to be clear about this, that it's not only the particular actors in the territory that are working towards transforming their territory and developing their initiatives, but this is something that goes back and forth, and it will always be like that. It's never settled, and so I think that's something important in relationship with the work we've done. That's it. Thanks.
Thank you, Mariano, Martin. I like it when you feel inspired to speak more. So thank you for that. Diana, I think we have one more question from you for Sebastián.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask you if you could expand on how this territory is shaped, but also by illegal activities, because I was saying that's something that we don't see in the literature. We often talk about the economic activities, the cultural activities, etc., but illegality tends to be quite overlooked, at least in regional studies, economic geography, which are the fields we try to address here. So if you could tell us a little bit more how territories are shaped by this illegality.
Sure. We can say that territory shapes, illegality shapes territory as the power relations within communities are strongly related to the presence or absence of these criminal groups. And when we see that the group that is actually present and strongly control the territory, the dynamic within communities is we can say that when the group is actually controlling the territory, we can see that we have a situation of more even peaceful situation for members of the communities, because there is not confrontation with different groups, and from one side. But for the other side, when these groups they have more power within the community, they also constrain the daily life, as they actually say to the members of the community what can they do or what they cannot do. So in a way, the criminal activity, when it's strongly eradicated in the community, can have positive and negative outcomes for the communities and for the daily life or within them. Positive is that we can actually have more peaceful situation without confrontation between members, gangs organization. And the negative part is that when the state is absent and the criminal groups are more present and powerful, they can actually decide what can be done or what cannot be done within communities. And of course, the territory shapes as they actually also control the movements of the people, allowing people to enter or not to enter, and allowing people to do certain kind of stuff or not certain kind of stuff. When a person is prohibited to conduct the daily life in a natural manner, of course, this has a big impact on the territory, as they are not allowed to leave the territory as well freely as they would like to do.
Thank you, Sebastián. I think you're very popular today with the questions. There's another one here for you in the chat. I will press this answer live to see what happens. Okay, so it says, I would like to ask you about the role that foreign universities play in developing Latin American territorial research. Do local universities benefit from collaboration with them, or has this been an impediment to the development of local theories? Where does the line between collaboration and dependence lie? Oh, I think this is for everyone, actually. So whoever would like to answer, please. I think it's a question that stems a little bit from the answer that Mariano and Martin gave, which I thought was very interesting, about how the state is also expressed through the action of universities, right? So I think it's a very important question that we have yet to discuss much here in Latin America. But Sebastián would like to say something.
Yeah, I think that this also relates to one of the things, one of the key findings of my research, that is that we should start to develop more, not just the case studies analysis, but also theories regarding the particularities, specificities of our territories. And that's what I say when I wrote that in order to understand local territory strategies of the drug gangs organization, we also have to understand what is actually happening here in our local situation. And in order to do so, we have also to understand that one specific location has some characteristics that another specific location, maybe really close, has other different characteristics. That's to say that when we actually use theories that are created in a far away, I don't know, country or even continent, we must do the same thing. I mean, to reorganize our ideas, maybe seeing the territory, but understanding what are the specificities of our territories. But I would not always talk about or understand collaboration as dependence, because I think that the situation at least in the last decade is changing. As of course, we have collaboration with foreign university, maybe from the global north, okay, that might have a little more money than the university in the global south. But what I see in the last decade is that the collaboration is giving the opportunities to the global south university to actually give to present their own voices without actually imposing an idea. So I think that the challenge now is for us, Global South scholars, to understand that the way to actually use, global North territories is not just to implement them point by point, but to understanding what is useful for us and what is not.
Maybe I can add a little bit to that, because I feel like I'm in the wrong position, because I do work in a global North university. So I think maybe Sebastián, Mariano, Martin might be a better place to give an opinion on this. But I did come across once a a presentation in a different space about collaboration between Global North, Global South universities. And a key takeaway was to think of them from a decolonial perspective, and also being very aware of what each place brings, because there's a lot of knowledge. And sometimes we tend to value more the theoretical knowledge that's been produced in the fancy university, and perhaps disregard a little bit the very localized knowledge, the contextual, the cases that's informing that theory. And that's normally often in these collaborations held in the Global South University. And it tends to be undervalued. So if we need to start putting this both in a balance and just consider them as equal as well, not just having a decolonial approach to these collaborations and not expecting perhaps an equal contribution in terms of theory or etc., but more back and forth conversation.
Can I add something? I think, I agree with you, Diana, and I think there's a lot of theoretical developments here in Latin America, in the Global South, as you say, and I think we need to use them more in when we write and when we do research in articulation with universities and research centers from the Global North. Sometimes we tend to just take their questions or take their theories for granted. I mean, as the ones that we have to use, and we tend to forget that there is much that has been done here in Latin America, for example. This is why, for example, we used with Martin dependency theory, which is now somewhat being retaken in the North also. But it's a good moment to present these theoretical developments from the Global South in the North. I think that's important. And there's a problem. And one last thing, then there's the issue of that Global North financing institutions usually sometimes don't care about the issues or the problems and the questions that we have in the Global South, and it's sometimes difficult to convince them that it's important. What we ask and what the questions we have are important in the production of knowledge at the global scale, and not just in terms of their local Global North interests. I think that's something that we have to work on, and it has a lot to do with our partners in the North. I mean, what their ability to allow our questions from the South to enter their research agendas, I think.
Hence the book.
All right, everyone. Thank you very much for attending this conversation. We appreciate your time. Thank you very much for all the attendees, all the co-authors and the editors, and also, to everyone. So I don't forget any. Thank you very much. I hope to see you, and have a good rest of the day. Okay, goodbye.